Yahuwah, we pray, open you our eyes, that we may behold wondrous things out of your Torah. Your word is a lamp unto our feet, and a light unto our path. For the commandment is a lamp, and the Torah is light, and reproofs of instruction are the way of life.
All right, so we understand that the Jews were familiar with the Greeks long before the time of Yahushua HaMashiach. So now we're going to look at Antiochus IV, called Epiphanes. And his reign was from 175 to 164 BC. Second Maccabees chapter 4, starting in verse 7. But after the death of Seleucus, when Antiochus called Epiphanes took the kingdom, Jason the brother of Onias labored underhand to be high priest, promising unto the king by intercession 360 talents of silver, and of another revenue 80 talents. Besides this, he promised to assign 150 more, if he might have license to set him up a place for exercise, and for the training up of youth in the fashions of the heathen, and to write them of Jerusalem by the name of Antiochians. Okay, so during this time where Antiochus Epiphanes came into power, this Jew named Jason, who was brother to the high priest Oniah, was a very wicked person. He was a very wicked man, and he basically colluded with Antiochus to bring the Greek culture into Jerusalem. He conspired with Antiochus to build a gymnasium for Greek sports, and of course the ancient Greeks had their own ways of doing sports. They did sports naked, which of course is against Hebrew culture. And he instituted other ways of Greek culture into Jerusalem. Verse 10, which when the king had granted, and he had gotten into his hand the rule, he forthwith brought his own nation to Greekish fashion. And the royal privileges granted of special favor to the Jews by the means of John the father of Eppolemus, who went ambassador to Rome for amity and aid, he took away. And putting down the governments which were according to the law, he brought up new customs against the law. For he built gladly a place of exercise under the tower itself, and brought the chief young men under his subjugation, and made them wear a hat. Okay, so we see that this man, Jason, who was a Jew, he colluded with Antiochus to bring the nation of Judea to Greekish fashion, in other words, to Greek culture. And the freedom that the Yahudim, or the Jews, had, because remember, under Alexander gave the Yahudim the freedom of following their own culture. Alexander gave the Jews the freedom of following the Torah without being harassed. All right, now under Jason and Antiochus, those freedoms were taken away, and it became against the law for the Jews to follow the Torah, and they were actually forced to follow the ways of the Greeks. Verse 13. Now such was the height of Greek fashions, and increase of heathenish manners, through the exceeding profaneness of Jason, that ungodly wretch, and no high priest, that the priests had no courage to serve any more at the altar, but despising the temple, and neglecting the sacrifices, hastened to be partakers of the unlawful allowance in the place of exercise, after the game of discus called them forth. But setting by the honors of their fathers, but liking the glory of the Grecians best of all. So even the Levites, the priests, started to follow the ways of the Greeks. Second Maccabees chapter 6, starting in verse 1. Not long after this, the king sent an old man of Athens to compel the Jews to depart from the laws of their fathers, and not to live after the laws of Elohim, and to pollute also the temple in Jerusalem, and to call it the temple of Jupiter Olympius, and that in Gerizim of Jupiter the defender of strangers, as they did desire that dwelt in that place. The coming in of this mischief was sore and grievous to the people, for the temple was filled with riot and reveling by the Gentiles, who dallied with harlots, and had to do with women within the circuit of the holy places, and besides that brought in things that were not lawful. The altar also was filled with profane things, which the law forbids. Neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days or ancient fasts, or profess himself at all to be a Jew. Okay, so all this to say that during the times of Antiochus, the Greek culture was brought into Jerusalem, and the Yahudim were forced to follow the ways of the Greeks, some willfully, some unwillfully. However, it was against the law for a person to proclaim himself to be a Jew. So when we look at what happened to the Yahudim of the southern kingdom of Judah, the Israelites of the northern kingdom of the house of Israel were already in exile at this time. So if it was unlawful for a Jew to call himself a Jew, what do you think happened to the Israelites that were in exile? Okay, so the Greek Empire took over the Assyrian Empire. And remember that the northern kingdom of the house of Israel was taken exile into the Assyrian Empire. Well, the Assyrians were conquered by the Greeks. So what about those Israelites that were cut off from their heritage of the northern house of Israel? What did they call themselves? If it was illegal for a Jew to call himself a Jew, what would the Israelites in exile call themselves at this time? Okay, and we have to also understand that the Jews eventually defeated the Greeks, and they enjoyed a period of independence of about 100 years. So the Jews in Judea, the southern kingdom of the house of Judah, was actually able to reclaim their heritage. But the Israelites of the northern kingdom that were exiled into Assyria, which eventually was taken, the region that of the Assyrian Empire was taken over by the Greek Empire. What did they call themselves if it was illegal for them to call themselves Israelites? So here we see the map of the exile of the house of Israel into the Assyrian Empire. And now we're going to look at the map of the Greek Empire. So we have this overlaid. So we look at the area of the Assyrian Empire, and now we're going to look at the area of the Greek Empire. Okay, so we see that if the Israelites of the northern house of Israel were exiled into Assyria, when the Greeks took over that same area, they would have been scattered even more into the Greek Empire. Now, after the Greek Empire, the Romans took over. So the time of the first century Yahudim, the time of Yahushua HaMashiach, that was during the time of the Roman Empire. That was during the time where Judea was under the oppression of Rome. So now we see from the Assyrian exile to the Greek Empire, now to the Roman Empire. So a lot of these places are where some of the Yahudim and some of the Israelites were scattered to. Now we're going to overlay that map of the Roman Empire with a map of Shaul or Paul's missionary journeys and look at the places where Shaul or Paul traveled to. Why did Paul travel to these particular places? Who was he trying to reach? Was he trying to reach Greeks? People who were Greek by ethnicity? Well, this was during the time of the Romans. So who were the Greeks that Paul was talking about? We have to understand the history and the context of the letters of Paul. What was going on during the time of Paul and his contemporaries? What was the purpose of Paul going to these specific places? Again, when we talk about Paul's letters and who Paul was writing to, we have to understand the context and the history. Paul was not writing in a vacuum. So when we ask the question, who are Paul's Greeks? In Paul's letters, there's a dichotomy between the Jews and the Greeks. Why the two? Why not the Jews and the Romans? Why not the Jews and the Chinese? Why not the Jews and the Hamites? Why is it the Jews and the Greeks? And again, why is it the Jews? Why is it not the Israelites and the Greeks? Where in the prophets does it speak about Yahuwah making the Jews and the Greeks one? You won't find it. But we do find in the prophets where it talks about Yahuwah making the house of Judah and the house of Israel one again. And again, we understand from the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai that even from the beginning, there was one Torah both for the native born and for the foreigner. So any foreigner that wanted to serve Yahuwah, all they had to do was submit to Israel and follow the Torah. When we see many conversions, many people who are foreigners that lived among the Israelites and served Yahuwah. So why would it be needed for Paul to make special letters concerning the Greeks? So who really are these Greeks that Paul is writing about?
Shema Yisrael. You are the light of the world. Let the love of Yahuwah and light of Torah shine in your hearts. May the face of Yahuwah shine on you. Shalom.